I didn't think it was possible, but somehow the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift presents the audience with a lead character with even less charisma than Brian O'Connor. And yes, this is the first time that I've even noticed Brian has a surname. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
It's not the ride, it's the rider.
I have so much to say about his accent. I was gonna get out of the way right here. This is a movie podcast, everyone. We are working through the Fast and the Furious movies. Not all of them quite yet. We're doing the first 5 in this block. We'll come back and do the rest next year. Although it occurred to me, because of Hobbs and Shaw, we probably should have done 6 rather than 5. But that's, you know what? We've already scheduled everything out now. It's fine. We're here. This is going to be Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. This is the 3rd movie in the franchise. We will start spoiler free as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we go to spoilers. Previously on the Collector's Cut, first movie I thought was utter shit. David was a little bit more tolerable, but agreed with most of the complaints levied at it. Too Fast, Too Furious, we both thought was better than the first movie. Better paced, slightly more fun.
Interesting action scenes compared to the first one.
Yeah, so that's where we stand coming into this one. And this is kind of, this was like, we don't have the main cast. We're just kind of almost trying to treat it as if it's like an anthology movie where we can just jump around different people involved with cars.
I said it in the last review. No franchise has ever been more forgiving to a marketing department. Of like, we're just going to do something totally different now. Whatever.
Yeah. So we'll get into it. The premise of this one is our main character, who we're introduced to, is a high schooler named...
High schooler.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a high schooler. I agree. He did not look a high schooler or sound like a high schooler, but he's supposedly a high schooler. Yeah. Named Sean, who... ends up moving to Japan. Well, we'll go into why, obviously, when we talk about the spoilers and plot, but he ends up moving to Japan and gets involved in the drift racing scene in Tokyo. And would you believe it, he's got his eye on a girl who is with a baddie who he's going to eventually race and stuff. Yeah. That's the broad strokes of it.
I think for this particular movie, what's the most interesting for me is that this movie is the most believable romance subplot out of all of them.
That's it. That is a damning statement for both this movie and the other movie.
It is. That's what was crazy to me, because I was like, oh, I actually believe these characters give a crap about each other. Every other Fast and Furious movie, Paul Walker and whoever he's into that week is like, I mean, I could see them sleeping together, but I can't believe they're interested.
I don't know if I don't know if I'm ready to argue you, but I also don't think I'm ready to agree with you either. Like I feel really weirdly in like in a void here based on what you just said. I'm just sort of in this ocean surrounded by nothingness, and I'm like, what do I say? What do I say to what he just said? I don't know. I do not compute.
You could just agree. I could have a win for once.
I don't know if I want to agree. I don't know if I do agree.
Fair,
yeah. We'll get into.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this is like Love Actually. I'm not saying this is the all-time great love story of our generation. It's crap, but it's better than the last two.
Now, I've not seen Love Actually, but that's your example for the greatest love story of our generation?
I mean, it's not. It's a good way of it. This isn't about Love Actually. Don't put me on the spot for this.
I feel like there's better romance movies you could have whipped out. Twilight, for example. So, yeah. I think, first things first. So, Justin Lin directed this. And Justin Lin's actually a regular director on this franchise. He actually sticks around and does the 4th one. He does the 5th one. I think he does the 6th one, and then he comes back and does the 9th one.
I think it's the 7th. I might be wrong on that.
Oh, it's the 7th, sorry.
I think he does 4, 5, 7. I could be wrong. I'm looking at it now.
Oh, no, 6 is here. I've got him in these.
6 is there?
It's 6.
Oh, that's right. 7 is when Juan hops on.
Yes. It's 6, but no 7. And then he comes back for 9, and he's not involved in the new ones. He's not in 10 or 11. So that's notable. We have a director here who's going to be a mainstay for the franchise. So if we have critiques about the direction as we go, something to note for the future, because he's sticking around. obviously this movie doesn't contribute that much to the franchise. There are obviously some things, like the director, and there's one character who was a bit of a fan favorite who is going to sticking around, so that's something. Not the only I mean, the main guy does apparently appear later, but I mean, I don't know to what extent, because I don't remember him. So that's that. Our main character of Sean is played by Lucas Black, and like our introduction to this character for me was a roller coaster ride of emotions and feelings. I didn't know how to parse how I felt, because on the one hand, I'm like, he looks as bland as Paul Walker.
Uh-huh.
But they thought to themselves, how do we spice him up? They thought, we'll get someone with an Alabama accent to be our lead character.
If he can't be interesting, he'll sound interesting.
That's what they were hoping for. I'm not so sure I'm convinced it worked, but he is... There's a moment early on where he almost has a bit of a personality, and there's a moment where I won't get into it too much, but there's a moment where he smells at a girl that he was trying to win the affection of, but because of the car wreck that he's just been in, his mouth's all bloody, and she kind of looks disgusted at him. And the fact that he just keeps smelling like he's still very proud of himself, regardless, I almost felt like that was almost actually a little bit of character. Like the fact that you're not like embarrassed that she's reacting that way, I thought, oh, maybe this guy's going to have some character, but that was kind of the extent of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel the biggest issue that his character has in this, or lack thereof, I should say, is that every one of the people he's surrounded by tells us how he has been, and we don't actually really see that. We just see this totally separate thing.
It's that combined with, I mean, obviously, I don't think the actor's great as well. Doesn't have a much charisma, but I think the other big problem is that his character, as far as the writing goes, he's not that likable. Like, it never really gives us much of a reason to like give a shit about him, or they're going for that kind of troubled kid who keeps getting into trouble. But usually when you have those stories and you still want to root for them a little bit, it's because they're still kind of like, they're doing it for the right reasons, or because they're sticking up for someone, and they're standing up against the bully, even though they're using like sort of like reckless means to do it or whatever. But you know, in this movie, he goes to live with his dad because he's been getting in so much trouble street racing and shit that I'm just like the entire time I'm thinking I'm on the dad's side. Like I'm like it's funny that I brought up Twilight, because this is Twilight. This is where I'm like, Bella's dad's the only sane character in that entire goddamn movie.
That's fair. I think that this movie, and the fact that they made the protagonist a high schooler, I think it speaks volumes to the target audience they were going for here.
That's fair.
I think that this 100% was just, the teens are supposed to look at how the dad's reacting, and they're like, oh, he just doesn't understand. Whereas me and you coming in around the age of 30, it's like, okay, but like, kid, cool your jets.
Yeah, my big problems with the character, is it from a story perspective anyway, was just that it never made me want to root for him. It never justified what he was doing. He just felt like a reckless asshole who kept getting into trouble. And even when he goes through like the character beats of like, oh, like the dad gives him a talking to and he has to try, he never actually tries to like even not be like a reckless street racer. He just immediately kind of starts doing it again with no attempt. There's no struggle, there's no nothing. He just kind of does it. I don't know. We'll get into it more as we're going through it and stuff, but the character for me was just kind of this weird wet blanket.
On the flip side of that, I want to talk about Han, because Han is the best character in this movie, hands down.
He's probably the best character in this franchise so far.
I'll agree with that too. This guy is so effortlessly cool. This is when they were trying to make in the first movie Paul Walker be cool. This is what he had to be. It's so natural to him, and I just love it.
It's something as simple as he's sitting there eating a bag of snacks the first time we see him, and he just like, I don't know, he just, the actor's just a cool guy. He gets it. He knows how to carry himself. It's that simple. It's not that the character's even that written well or deep or even that interested. He just carries himself well, and that's enough.
I will put out just a little bit of trivia here. The actor who plays him, and I don't have it up on screen at the moment. The actor who plays him, he was picked by Justin Lin from a previous project he did, where he was also a man named Han who was mixed up in like the seedy underground of like Japanese mafia.
Are you
stuff
telling
like that.
me that there's a secret in-universe movie?
Not in universe, but all of the fans of the franchise apparently consider it to be his backstory because it just works.
Sounds like a sneaky backdoor spin-off to me.
I mean, it kind of is, but that was before Justin Lin got tapped to do this. That was 2002, so...
Yeah, you can retcon it in. Why not? It works. You have the love interest who, despite being in Japan, the love interest is not Japanese. She is Australian.
Yep.
She's the most bland CW actress.
So,
honestly,
I will put out, this is her very first role in anything ever.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I think with that in mind, she did an okay job. I think that for a first role, it was fine enough. But yeah, she is very bland in general.
Yeah, like she's not the worst I've ever seen in the terms in terms of like delivery lines and stuff. She's like acceptable enough, but she just kind of comes off like the character's very thinly. The girl that the bad guy has, that the good guy's kind of flirting with, and she looks like she's off a CW show. And I think when I looked her up, she was on the Vampire Diaries or something like that.
Yes.
So that does not surprise me. She feels tailor-made for that world, by all means.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, that's kind of it for the important characters. I mean, I know...
I mean, our antagonist would be...
Yeah. What's his
the big
name?
one.
DK.
His DK is his nickname, stands for Drift King. His actual name is Takashi.
Yeah. I'm glad that the first guess what DK stood for in the movie, though, was Donkey Kong, because that's exactly the first thing I thought of.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm not even a Nintendo person. It's still the first thing I thought of.
I like him as a villain. I like him as an antagonist, because he's decently menacing. But in terms of any sort of depth or backstory to his character, he's just the villain. There's nothing more to it.
He's just the angry asshole boyfriend. It feels like we've regressed from the last, because the last movie obviously had this big plot about trying to take on this bad, and he was a cartoony villain, and that was something we talked about.
Yeah.
But this feels pared back, as now it is just about, like, this is the first movie in the franchise where the climax is actually a race. You know, because it's always been, like, there's racing along the way, but the actual big climax is like, oh, it's this sting to take down this big bad guy, or it's trying to stop this heist in the first movie. This is actually just ends up being built up to a race, which actually leads myself to the biggest problem I had with the script in this movie, is that for a long period in this movie, there's actually not, pardon the pun, a driving force that we're building to something, because the main character, like, he wants to get involved in the local racing and stuff, and he kind of does it, but he kind of, like, gets better at the drifting thing and ultimately kind of wins a race in a montage. We don't even really focus on it. And it's not really until the last act where it kind of takes the guy who's kind of the antagonist and turns him into an actual proper villain antagonist. And up until that point, there's really not a lot of, like, momentum. You know, the second movie, like, we're building up to what we're doing, right? We're building up to the last big, you know, sting operation.
Yeah.
This is what the movie's about. First movie, and I don't like the first movie, but at least that had, oh, he's undercover and he's trying to, and eventually he's going to be faced with this choice. Like, is he going to try and take them in, or is he one of the family now, kind of thing. This movie, it just, like, for a lot of it, as far as, like, what we're building to, it's just kind of meandering with, oh, he's getting to know Han, and he's getting to know the drifting, and he's getting to know the girl a little bit. There's not a lot of, like, oomph to building towards something.
Yeah, I think that's a consequence of what the primary quote-unquote message of the story is, which is we open up the movie of them having Sean and his mother move around a lot because he keeps on getting into trouble. And long story short, he builds up some friendships here. He actually makes a place for himself. And when it comes time that he would normally, you know, he got in trouble again and he would normally have to leave again, he puts down his foot and says, no, I'm staying this time. And because of that, that's where the consequence is that we had to spend all that time making him feel like he belongs here. And that requires it to not be filled with conflict. Because once he reached that conflict, his character should have just left. They had to give him a long period of time where there was really nothing wrong at all with what he's doing. So that way, when he did have to make the choice of run away or stay, he's already gone through the character development enough to say, I'm going to stay.
Yeah, it's a sort of thing where like a better script would manage those two things better. And I'm sure, like, I don't have one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's movies that have done that style of plot before where it's a character in, you know, by the time we get to the end of Act 2, they realize, no, I'm going to stay here and fight for this new place that I've kind of come to see as home. And they'll do it without it feeling like it's meandering until that point. And they'll have him, you know, the forming of the friendships will be a big part of the story, and it'll feel like they're... Whereas here, he just kind of ends up lumping in with people, and, like, you know, it's like, hey, this crazy kid who sells iPods is, you know, he's your best friend.
I mean, should we even talk about Bow Wow? Is he worth bringing up?
I'm glad you know who it is, because I didn't know who it was.
Yes. It is Lil Bow Wow, who is no longer Lil. He is just Bow Wow. And he's the character of Red from Shawshank Redemption in his, like, career, in that he can just fence stuff and buy stuff and sell stuff.
I see what you're saying there. Okay, yeah. Yeah, he's the guy who gets things in. But except he's just... They're not in prison already. He has a lot of products to sell for some reason.
Yeah, for whatever reason, he's selling iPods and sneakers and laptops.
Yes, Air Jordans. Go see it in theaters the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, he's almost trying to fill the role that Ludacris had last film of just sort of that little sidekick that's always pumping up the main guy, but he doesn't feel important to the plot. Like they put all of that role into Han instead of
I
into
wouldn't
him.
dare say there's a formula to these movies yet, but his role feels like a bit a formula that they're trying to fill in.
Yeah.
You know, if there is a formula, it's not so much in the plot structure yet, because they're kind of dangling back and forth as to what it's really about. You know, it's like street racing, it's about hikes, it's about taking down a bad guy, whatever. This one, I think, though, the one thing that they do all have in common is that we have to have montages of, like, sexy girls bending over cars as, like, thumping music plays. You know, that's there in full force throughout this movie. So, I've never asked the question yet, but so I suppose just to sort of get some broad takes on it and where we stand with this versus the first two. David, did you enjoy The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift?
I'm glad you said the colon, because it might be important to the naming scheme by the time we hit 11.
Hey, for all we know, there could be a 14th movie that's Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift without a colon, just to distinguish it between this one and that one.
They're going to call it, like, Drifting Tokyo or something, just to really screw with us.
It'll be Drifting Furiously.
Yes. Okay, so in terms of how much I like this movie, I enjoyed it. I think it was a fun little thing. I think that it's so divorced from the Fast and Furious franchise, as we know it so far. Obviously, it gets kind of molded in there, but this feels like, as you said, the beginning of when they were like, maybe this is an anthology series where we don't have to have the same characters, and because of that, the only thing in common is the cars. But not even that, because every time that they would have said the word race, or they would have talked about engines or something in any other Fast and Furious movie, this one just talked about how drifting is how you connect with the universe or whatever. Like, it's every single person here.
Okay, right, since you brought it up now, I was going to wait till later. But we have to talk about this cult of drift that is, and like, so here's the thing: the first time it's brought up, right? So Sean's getting into a race, and he's like, DK, what's that stand for? He's like, Drift King, and he's like, Drift? Confused? And I'm like, the one characteristic you have is that you love cars and you love to race and go fast. Now, I get that maybe a lot of drifting isn't the type of racing you do. That's fair enough. You don't know how to do it in, like, practice. But the idea that you wouldn't know what the word drift means is absurd.
Yeah.
Absurd. I know what drift means.
Well, this was 2006. So how many Mario Karts had come out at that point? Because that's about all I know drift from.
I know drifting from every racing game I've ever played, which goes back to like 97 at the very least. So this is baffling to me that someone who knows how to fix up a car, who likes to race fast, doesn't even know, or maybe he knows what it is, but he acts so confused, like he's drift, like, what context does the word drift matter here? And then the elevator door opens and they see someone drifting, and I'm like, oh, really? You needed a visual?
See, I'm okay with it because obviously from the film language side of things, we needed there to be one character who doesn't know what drifting is so that the audience can be introduced
the character
to it.
who we know loves cars and loves racing, that character's the one to pick?
There's no character in this movie who doesn't love cars and love racing. There's no one else. The only one they could pick is the fish out of water character who we've already established. I agree 100% is that it doesn't make any sense from a character perspective, but I don't think there was any character they could have picked. He was the best choice in an impossible situation.
Okay, right. So they're doing this idea that it's a lot of tight roads, and in this particular case, it's inside the multi-story parking structure, yes. Right? And there's a lot of drifting because it's a lot of tight corners and stuff, and that's fine, right? So, right. But the thing that gets me is that later on in the movie, the love interest, right?
Yeah.
What was her name? Mina?
Okay. Her name was like Nilla, I think.
Nilla.
Something like
that.
It was
Nilla.
But they said her name one time. And it was an hour and 10 minutes into this movie.
No, I think they say it at least once before then, because there's at least a moment where when he meets her again, he's like, oh, so it's he says her name, he's like, it's Nilla, right?
Oh, okay. In that case, I missed that part because I was waiting for it the
say
whole
at least
time.
Once early on. But there's a scene later on where she is drifting down the side of the mountain, right, on the road, and she's talking about how, but even before we all got our licenses, we'd come up here and just watch the older kids drift. So when we got our licenses, we'd come up here and we'd drift, and it's like we were lost and we were in the moment, and I'm like, okay, what is this? I mean, honestly, even just the fact that Sean arrives in Tokyo and there's literally just other high school kids that he just follows for that first day, and he finds the racing scene in the city is absurd on its own. But the idea that it's like drifting, man, it's like, no, drifting is just a part of it's just a part of race driving. It's
but that's the thing that I find amazing in this movie is the fact that they don't even care about racing. There are multiple conversations in this movie where they say, who cares about winning? It doesn't matter. Racing doesn't matter.
It's about
the only thing that matters is drifting, man. And I want to point out that scene where she's drifting on the mountains that you were talking about.
She's literally drifting side to side as she goes down the whole time.
Not only is she doing that, there are like 6 other cars on the other side of her that are all perfectly mirroring her movements. And the only thing that was popping in my mind, going back to the first movie, is how they talked about surfing in Point Break.
Yeah, that's exactly what but it's so stupid because no one talks about drifting like this.
Right.
I have no problem with, like, okay, we're going to do a big race, and it's to win this race, because the other guy is good at drifting, you also have to be good at drifting. Talking about it as a mechanic and as a skill in the context of a race is completely fine. But the idea that there's an entire group of people who talk about it like it is surfing, like it's riding the top of the wave, man, drifting is the... And I'm like,
it's closest you're going to get to God.
Surely the part that people, like, feel the thrill of in the car, right, is when you're going really fast and the wind's in your hair or whatever. That's what people normally talk about, but most people who drive cars will never experience drifting the car.
They don't experience the hand of God, then.
Most people who drive slow down to take a corner. That's how you do it. Only people who actually go to tracks and stuff and practice racing are the ones who learn to drift.
I especially love there's a practice scene later on where he's trying to get the hang of drifting. And he tells Bow Wow that he wants to replace the tires again. And Bow Wow points out he's already been through 3 sets of tires just that day. And I'm like, maybe this is a reason why we don't drift. Because you're just filling up landfills with these tires.
I did laugh, though, because when he first tries to race and tries to drift and fails spectacularly, it made me chuckle, because this is the first time I play a new racing game and I've not learned the controls yet. This is how I take every corner, is smash it into the wall.
You're like, I wonder how fast the brakes kick in. Psh, well, not that fast.
Yeah, okay. Recalibrating. Yep. So
but I absolutely loved and hated the fact that it was all about drifting, because it was weird at first. It was strange when they were all just like, oh, racing doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's how you drift. And I'm like, it's stupid. But at a certain point in this movie, and I think it's probably at the point where she's talking about how they went to the mountains and watched the older kids drift, that I was like, oh, I get it now. It's meant to be this stupid. And then I just started having fun with how everyone was just talking about it like that. And there's a point in the, like, I don't want to call it the climax of this movie, but during one of the major chase scenes where they have to go through what I can only describe as the Times Square of Tokyo. And there are all these people walking around, and they drift through this crowd, and the music is killed, and it's just like this angelic choir sort of sounding music as they're drifting through in slow motion. I'm like, okay, you're just having fun. That's all this is. That's not supposed to make sense. It's just stupid fun. Again,
maybe I'm just an old man now, but there's so many of these driving scenes where I'm like, I don't like you because you're endangering so many people. If you lose control, there's so many people you might hit. Like, this is just pure form.
Pete, that is absolutely old man. The fact that you are looking at that and you're like, you're gonna hit somebody. Slow down. That is absolutely
yeah, but at least if to hit someone, I'll be entertained. If I see bodies flying and blood spurting in the air.
So let me get this straight. You want to tell the characters, you're going too fast, you're going to hit somebody. But if they did hit somebody, you'd be like, that was awesome.
Yeah, basically what I'm saying is either be Death Race 2000 and actually have that make sense that you're putting people in danger like this. But if you want me to look at it from real world logic, it's almost ridiculous how much danger these people are putting, like, other people in.
What was your thought? There was one point in this movie where they kick on the NOS and they go 197 kilometers per hour, and he flies by a cop, and Han points out that the cop isn't even going to bother because they top out at 180. What was your thought on that?
I mean, it made sense, I guess.
For me, it struck me as the writers just being like, hey, this movie isn't really about the law at all, and we don't want to have to deal with that.
That's true,
so we're just going to write in a little explanation as to why no cops ever show up.
It is actually kind of weird, yeah. The cops never try to break up like the crowd at the start of the. Like, I get they can't chase the cars, but that was. Yeah, a bit convenient. Yeah, as far as other things, anything else goes, spoiler-free territory. I don't know if I have anything else to really add. I mean, I suppose my general feeling, so I never really said that. So you said you had some fun. It's a dumb movie, you had fun, right? That was the gist of it. I did not really enjoy watching this all that much. I could probably get into the stupidity of talking about drifting the way they do.
Yeah.
But there's almost just like a... Like, I feel like at least someone somewhere is taking it seriously.
Oh, no doubt.
Right? I feel like they have to be more silly with it for me to get into the silliness of it. It's just on that line too much where I feel like they still want me to kind of take it seriously.
I mean, for a little bit of trivia here, there is that like mountain racing thing where they're having to drift around the corners. That's a thing. That is an actual thing in Japanese culture. And if you remember, during all the training scenes, there are two fishermen that are watching.
Yes.
At least one of those fishermen is the actual real life drift king, who like was famous in Japan for his drifting ability.
That's fine.
And he just got cameoed here.
Honestly, that's a fine idea for a race. It beats the straight line of the first movie, the quarter mile, right?
I was going to say, your whole thing was you wanted them to turn. Now they're turning in style.
I have no problem with drifting in the racings. I have no problem with that. My problem is that drifting is like riding on the wings of an angel, man. Like, that's the whole thing. So I didn't really like the movie, but it really boils down to, I think, the characters, right? Han aside, who's kind of entertaining on his own. Is it, like, as soon as he showed up, I'm like, I can tell why you're the thing that came out of this movie. Because you're the only one who's carrying himself like you're kind of a star. Everyone else just kind of feels like the main guy. This is the thing with the main guy, is that he is lacking charisma. He's unlikable, and the attempts, like the moments that are supposed to be there to make you feel like he's kind of a badass, come off as so laughably like try hard to me. I couldn't get behind him. I did not enjoy the main character in this at all. I didn't really like the love interest much. So yeah, I didn't really get into that stuff. And honestly, while I do think the race down the mountain is a fine idea for the finale, They decided to do the scene at night, and honestly, it made it hard to really like. Even though one car had racing stripes on it, you could barely see them because it was so dark that I didn't really. I found that scene kind of boring to actually watch. So
they didn't learn the lesson that they took from the first movie of the climactic one. Even if everything else has been at night, the climactic one needs to be in the day so you can pick up on all the stunt work.
And I don't actually have a problem with setting it at night. Even really, I think you can do it. Like I think you can do it, and it can still be clear and easy to see. But that's because it was just two cars duking it out, trying to get ahead of each other, and they look kind of similar, right? Even with the racing stripes that you could barely see, it didn't. So I ended up just not enjoying. So I think on that level, it failed at being enjoyable as a race scene. And if a Fast and the Furious movie is failing on that level, then it's failing, you know. So I definitely think it's weaker than 2, right? I think that's straight up. It's weaker than 2.
Okay.
Compared to the first one, oh god, that is a tough comparison for me to like wrap my head around, because I think it's probably somewhere on par with the first one, and that's for coming from me, that is saying it's not good.
Yeah, that's not great. See, for me, I would probably put it on par with the second one, but that's just on the same level of stupid fun, you know?
I think the stupidity in 2 though was more kind of like on its sleeve and felt more genuine, whereas, and maybe it is because of the type of the actors they had in here, but this felt like more veering towards like obnoxious CW levels of stupidity.
Oh yeah, that's fair. I'll give you that.
Right? So, especially since so much of it was like, stop looking at my girl, man.
But see, that's what, going back to the very beginning of this, that's the only thing that made me feel like there was any sort of anything in their romantic interest together, is that there was someone who actually gave a damn about it.
But should they have given a damn about it?
I mean, that was the other thing in this movie that got me, was I don't think they spend more than 2 collective minutes talking about the actual innards of the car. The only thing they care about is drifting. And then they're like, yeah, no, we made a car, it's super rich, whatever, but like, drifting.
Yeah, they talk less about it. There is a couple of montages of like putting cars together and like oogling at the engines, but yeah, there's less of the actual, nitty-gritty talk about them.
Yeah.
Which is fair. We just have the crappy romance instead. So, yeah.
Trading apples for oranges.
Alright, full spoilers for Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. You have been warned, so we can get through this. I have so many thoughts on the opening of this movie. There is... The opening title sequence of this movie is this extended slow-motion sequence of our main character, Sean, going to school. So he's like walking through the metal detectors. He's like standing next to the mascot of whatever the school team is. He's in like some furry costume.
Fighting ducks, man.
Was it a duck?
It was a duck.
Was it a duck?
Because the whole thing was there was going to be a game later on, the Ducks versus the Indians. Which, I feel like the Ducks is the stupidest mascot I've heard recently, but whatever.
Oh, you got the Mighty Ducks, the ice hockey team?
Yeah, but these weren't the Mighty Ducks.
That's true.
These didn't have that.
These were the...
These were just the Ducks.
What's the opposite of Mighty?
The fragile.
The fragile ducks.
The fragile ducks.
But no, there's just so much of him walking in like slow motion, looking around at things and looking at people and whatever. And it builds up to like he's leaving for the day, and there's a girl in a convertible next to his car, and she says, "Oh, nice ride" or whatever, and he talks to her, and the older brother from Home Improvement comes sauntering along. He's very upset.
That's where he was from.
Yeah, I recognized him, man. I knew he was. He comes over. He's like, "Are you talking to my girl?" And he gets all antsy at him. And I'm like, this is really what we're doing. And in many ways, this opening, 10 minutes set in, I assume California, is setting up kind of like, in a nutshell, what the whole movie's going to be, which is that he's going to get involved with some asshole's girl, and they're going to race, and so on and so on. The difference being, of course, is that he's going to not move away at the end of the movie because he's found a new home. But he challenges the asshole to a race after he throws a baseball and smashes his car window. He gets upset, and this happens repeatedly. Basically, this douchebag is constantly feeling emasculated because every little thing, because his girl even looks in in Sean's direction, he is ready to go to war.
Can I just point out how this entire intro was fueled by the girlfriend?
Oh, absolutely. Like, yeah, she is playing these two against each other. In fact, one of my first thoughts was, like, if this girl effectively, like, puts herself up, like, as a prize, because Sean's like, hey, I only race for pink slips, this race. And, like, the douchebag's like, I'm a rich guy with a rich car. Like, why would I want your piece of shit?
I've got a Corvette. You've got a Buick.
And the girlfriend's like, okay, how about you race for me? Winner gets me. And all I could think was, if I was Sean in this scene, is I would be like, I wouldn't want you. If you're just going to go with whoever wins in a car race, to me that says you're not someone worth being with. So I wouldn't want you.
The only thing when she said, like, winner gets me, the only thing that was going through my mind was putting myself in the position of one of the students who had gathered around and be like, oh, there's Cindy again, just putting herself up for whatever. We were in science class and she said first one to finish the labs gets her. I don't understand why she does it.
So they go to like a construction site, and it's like a whole like neighborhood of like houses that are being built. So there's like lots of like half done houses. There's lots of like pallets of construction stuff, like, all just sitting around, and they're going to race through here. And I'm like, okay, fine, this is an interesting setting for a race. You know, cool, whatever. And they do race, and they're ramming into each other. Sean takes like a weird like kind of like shortcut like through like dirt road behind some of the houses, and
through a dirt road and through a house.
Yeah, he has to go through a house because he's going to hit like a bulldozer or something if he doesn't. And you know, he's riding up alongside the douchebag, and because he's kind of starting to win, the girlfriend who's sitting in the passenger seat with the douchebag from Home Improvement turns and says, I thought you loved me. And I'm like, this woman has mental problems.
Yes, she absolutely does.
This is not just teenage stupidity. This is like, no, send her to a psychiatrist. She needs help.
Yeah. Nah, and then like 2 seconds later when Sean pulls ahead, she's like, well, I guess I've got a new date for prom.
Yes.
And that's what sends him over the edge into psychotic rage.
Well, this is what I was saying. He's such a fragile like douchebag. Like, he's so emasculated when she says that he immediately starts, that's when he starts ramming the car into him. It's like, no, I'll ruin my rich Porsche or whatever it is to just, you know, because I now feel like I have to, because
possibly kill him.
Yeah, my manhood's been questioned.
And then she starts freaking out because of what she directly caused and says, stop the car, I don't want to get hurt. It's like, no, you started this, man.
And then after they both have car wrecks and they're sitting in the police station and she's sitting there, like, this was all, like, you started, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these other two are blameless. These two are just as equally in the blame for this. But she's sitting there like she's disgusted by the two of them, and I'm like, you're as culpable, like, you're as culpable as either of these two. Like, all three of you are guilty. All three of you deserve to do prison time. Like, all three of you are terrible.
That being said, I think that does do a good job of leaning into the next scene where the cop is basically saying, like, hey, they're rich, you're poor, they're gonna beat the rap, and we're going to throw the book at you.
Do you know what? This was a fine thing to bring up. This is a fine theme to have in your movie, that he wants to be this reckless driver, this racer, but he can't get away with it because he's not rich. That is a theme that they could have kept playing on, but they don't. Like, once it gets to Japan, it doesn't matter anymore.
Nah, because he has funding. He has a guy, he's Han, who's just like, yeah, just whatever, take a car.
This could have been an interesting theme to pursue, is that he, like, there's no safety net for him. Yeah. But they don't really play with that at all, so oh well.
But then the mom comes in, and there's just one moment in this scene. I don't even know why they did it, because it didn't end up being anything. But the mom comes in, mentions that she's divorced to the cop, and then asks if she can smoke. And then as she asks that, they cut to a shot of the cop, and there's clearly a no smoking sign behind him, but he decides to light her cigarette anyway.
I mean, it's just trying to set up that she is like, she tries to flirt to get her son out of things, and you know, maybe she's just flirty in general or whatever, but this is like her tactic.
It's the girlfriend tactic of use what you got to get people to do things.
So maybe that explains why he finds that appealing in a woman. Yeah, it's his weird mummy issues. That's all I could say.
This movie transitions so perfectly from mommy issues to daddy issues in like one scene.
Yeah, I think so the whole thing here is that they've moved around like 3 times in the last couple of years because he keeps getting into trouble, so they moved to a new town. But now he's got priors, this is like the 3rd strike, like he's going to have to go to juvie, and she basically cuts a deal with the cops that how about he goes and lives with his dad in Japan, and it turns out his dad is like, you know, with the Navy or something, and he's stationed in Japan at a base. So he's going to go live with him, which is very Twilight, going to live with the dad after the divorce kind of thing. But he goes to live with him, and the dad doesn't even show up to like pick him up at the airport. And when he arrives, he gets a cab, he goes to his dad's, and his dad's like, oh, sorry, I thought you were coming on the 7th. And he's like, it is the 7th, or whatever. And there's like an awkward moment here where like his dad's like saying goodbye to a lady friend. You know, he's like, oh, give me a minute, and he says goodbye to her. I felt like that was setting something up, and then I was like, that never really plays into anything, like thematically.
I think it was all just supposed to play up the idea of he's a deadbeat dad. He's someone who hasn't been there for his son, and he was willing. In the eyes of the audience, was willing to put his son aside just to get some ass. Like, that's all I could think it was. Yeah, but
that's the thing, though. I don't really feel like he was a deadbeat dad. They kind of set up you know, he was moving around a lot for his military career, and that eventually led to the separation. Because he was the one moving around and being stationed elsewhere, he was the one who was just absent, right? So, obviously, you've got the career dad who kind of, like, gave up his family for that life, and you maybe you can have some like issues with that, and like he doesn't know his son that well, and he's struggling to be the disciplined dad or whatever. But yeah, this felt like it was almost like setting up a different character. This like this asshole father who cared more about other things and women specifically. But that never really came into it. Honestly, the way the story like bounces back and forth with like trying to pretend that his dad's like a major character and that they're going to play with their relationship, and then kind of forget about him. And then eventually just have him kind of like shrug his shoulders and go, yes, son, I understand. You have to do this because you're a man. Was, I don't know, was one of the worst parts of the movie to me.
Yeah, I don't feel they ever got a real grip on what the dad's characterization was in this movie. I think they started off wanting to go, not even deadbeat, but just someone who's not interested in taking care of a kid. Like someone who's got their own thing going on. But then he transitions from that immediately into the whole strict dad of my house, my rules. You're going to do this exactly as I say.
But not even but not even extremely though. It's like a very kind of like yeah, he's kind of like you said, lights out by 10, and it sounds kind of military style. But he's mostly understanding, and he gives actually a pretty good speech. Like when his son like doesn't come home from school the next day and he's doing race stuff, he comes back. He's like, "Have you been racing, son?" And he can't answer him. He's like, "Look." And he gives him this speech like, I'm going to make the phone call and send you back right now. And he gives him a speech like, this is for your own good. I'm supposed to look out for you, and you have to work with me. And don't get me wrong, I do think it's kind of weird and shitty that he just leaves him a note with a school uniform saying, hey, trained for the school leaves at 7. Because all I could think was, he's just moved to Japan where he doesn't speak the language, and you expect him to find his own way to anywhere is ridiculous. I was even thinking like once he gets to school, I'm like, the teacher's not even like the teacher's speaking Japanese. Like if you move to Japan or any country where English isn't the primary language, or you know, swap it around if you're speaking something else, but like you can't just show up to the school that is all speaking in a different language. And how is he learning anything?
I have no answers for you.
I mean, there's other students who are speaking English, but I mean, I don't know how this is working. Like something's going on. I'm
assuming they can also speak, because the one that we see bilingual at least is Neela.
Yeah, she's been there for a while though. Yeah,
she's pretty much born and raised in Japan. But no, it's. I understand the characterization of the father in the sense of he's military. He hasn't had to deal with his son for years now, and he's also trying to adjust to that. But I do think that it is an issue of, like you said, they keep on trying to pull back this plot of, oh, we're going to see this father-son reunion and they're going to understand each other. And eventually they do, but it doesn't feel like that was ever a plot. It was just a thing that was dropped into the movie.
Yeah, because here's the thing. So he gives them this speech about how you have to do better, you have to not screw up because your life is going to be messed up, blah, blah, blah. And it's a decent enough speech. It makes sense. And he comes across as not an asshole dad who's been too strict. He comes across as like, no, you have had trouble with the law and you were going to go to juvie. Like, I'm doing this for your own good. It all sounds reasonable. It all sounds like it makes sense. And at this point, yes, he does owe Han a car because he messed up Tan's car, right, in the first race stuff. And that's fair enough, right? So he's kind of maybe like locked into doing stuff that's going to betray what his dad's trying to tell him to do. That's fine. But he never, like, when Han like, shows up the next day and he's like, hey, get in and you work for me now and you do this, you do that. First of all, Han seems like a cool guy. He doesn't feel like he's threatening him ever. Sean doesn't say, I really shouldn't, I can't. He just is like, yeah, I'm in, as long as you teach me to drift. Like, he never has like a struggle or a moment where, shit, I have to do this because I owe you and I'll be in trouble with you if I don't, but that means I have to betray my father. That never even like feels like a consideration in his eyes, never mind a line of dialogue.
Well, I don't think it matters to him. I don't think there's any point in this movie where we see that Sean actually gives a crap about what his dad thinks. He's still 100%. From literally day one, he's still racing.
The only moment in the whole movie where he kind of relents slightly for his dad is he at least has the courtesy to make up an excuse and phone him for why he won't be home at a decent time.
But that doesn't even feel to me like he gives a crap about what his dad thinks. It just means that he knows his dad's going to be pissed when he gets home, and he's hoping to lessen the blow on himself.
That is fair. But it's the only, like, that's more than any other day.
Yeah.
Is that he's willing to give him a phone call and say, hey, I won't be late.
Maybe he's making this phone call every single day. He's like, Dad, did you know Japanese kids are really into clubs? Well, so I'm in like 3 of them now.
You say that, but he just one day decides to not go home and goes to live with Han instead without telling his dad. Because we see a scene of his dad coming home and he's just not there in his bed. Yeah. And he never contacts his dad until he's in trouble later. And then he has the big moment with his dad later where his dad kind of accepts that he's going to have to do this because he has to clean up his own mess because he's a man.
And that's the thing, is I feel like they transition the plot away from this thing of a father-son relationship to the father saying, I'm looking over you because you're immature, and then him finally stepping up and saying, I need to take care of my own problems, and being like, all right, you're a man now. Go do whatever you want. Yeah. Which... I get, but it just seems like a very bare bones plot. And it's not, by no means is it the central focus of this movie. It's barely even like a tertiary plot, but it's there.
It's just wishy-washy, because if you're going to bring these subjects in, because the dad's right, he shouldn't be doing this. He is getting himself into more trouble, and there's no real noble reason that he is getting into it. He just wants to, right? There's no, like, draw into it early on in the film.
I'm wondering if maybe it's supposed to be a counterplot to his conversations with Han, because Han's whole thing that he's teaching Sean is you have to be who you are and do what you want. Like, it's a whole thing of finding yourself.
Which, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, like, obviously you can have an arc where he's reckless to begin with and he learns something throughout and learns responsibility. I'm not so sure that's in the movie, though. Like, technically, when he says to his dad, I have to clean up the mess I made, that sounds like he's doing that, but I never really feel like he goes through an arc in the movie. No. So, no. I don't think that would be fair to say.
The only arc he goes through is the arc of the turn as he drifts around the corners.
Yes, he doesn't have an arc, he has a drift. He drifts.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah, so to go back to just like the actual racing stuff then, he goes with Bow Wow then to the parking structure.
We can keep calling him Bow Wow, but I do have to point out that his character's name is Twinkie, and that's just an awful name for a character.
I could eat a Twinkie. Like now, I mean, right now, I could have a Twinkie.
Could you eat Bow Wow?
Yeah. No. So weird thing with him, and this is the thing, is this thing where just like, this is kind of like the John Wick movies where everyone ends up in a part of the assassin world. Everyone the characters meet in these movies is part of at least into watching the street racing scene, if not part of it themselves. And Bow Wow takes them, and I've never seen this before, but given how compact like Japan can be, and they make that sort of joke with the apartment that his dad lives in, is that their parking system, at least somewhere, like they get their car back via like a, I don't even know what you call it, like a lift system where
it's like a conveyor belt but like vertically going around. These do exist. I do know that they exist in Japan.
That's fair. I mean, I assume it was a real thing. It feels like a weird thing to just make up for a movie like this. It's not a sci-fi movie. So but they do like a reveal of his car, right, where he's like, oh, is it this one? No. Is it this one? No. And it's this green car, and there's like a sort of sticking out like fist in, like not out the way, but like there's like a detail where it's like a bit of 3D effect of like a fist design in the car, and I thought, that makes me think of Hulk. And then the car spins round, and when you get to the front, there's actually a printing of Hulk's face on the front of the car, and you can see the interiors, like all the inlay is all like purple fabric, and I'm like, this is a Hulk car.
Yep. I'm glad that you were able to tell it was a fist from the back, because I stared at it for a good 30 seconds while they were doing the turnaround. I couldn't even tell what it was until they got to the side panels. I'm like, oh, they're hands.
I got it was a fist. Yeah, when I say 3D, I guess the better term would be like embossed. You know, like say when you buy like a metal tin of something, and they've got like a just a slightly sticky out effect on one part of the image. That's kind of what it is. Because it's from the side. It's not like the fist sticking out the front.
I mean, this just speaks to that fact of this movie was probably marketed even younger than the previous two movies. Because the fact of we have two high schoolers getting this Hulk detailed car out of the garage, and they're treating it like it is the coolest thing to ever exist. And I'm looking at it like, that just seems stupid. If I saw that driving down the road, I'd be like, wow.
To be fair, I do think Sean's reaction is this is not that cool. You know, I think the point is that Bow Wow's car is a bit ridiculous,
but the filming style and the way they do the reveal makes it seem like it's cool.
So yeah, so when villain, what's the villain's name? DK, sorry.
Takashi or DK.
DK, right. When DK gets mad, Neela is talking to Sean, right? And he comes up and he's all, meh. What are you doing? Get out of here, Gaijin, or whatever he calls him.
Gaijin.
But Bow Wow's like, hey, that dude's Yakuza. You have to, like, you know, don't mess with him. But Sean, of course, showing that he has absolutely no restraint whatsoever, just starts like talking to him and like.
He calls him Justin Timberlake.
Yeah, challenging
as an
him,
insult.
Railing him up, and says he wants to race, and everyone's just like, you don't have a car though. And that's when Han just throws him his keys and goes, hey, take mine. I want to see what you can do. Take mine. And sure enough, they do this race up this parking structure, drifting up and whatnot. And Sean does not know how to drift. He smashes the car into the walls repeatedly. It is a complete wreck by the time they get to the top of the building. And Han's like, don't leave the city because I own you now for wrecking my car. Like, you owe me.
But he doesn't even say it menacingly. He just comes up and be like, I'll see you around. Like he knows this is the start of the new business deal.
It almost feels like he knew that like before he started. He's like, this guy's going to owe me for wrecking my car, and I can basically use him. For whatever reason, though, he likes him. He likes Sean. I don't know why, because he's not likable, but he likes him.
I want to see the alternate universe where Sean, instead of, like, he realizes he can't drift, and instead of trying to, he just granny turns all the corners. And he doesn't wreck the car at all, but he still loses, but it's just like, all right, well, goodbye. You don't owe me. I guess for gas, that's all I got.
What's funny is that, you know, so it sets up that he loses this, and then he starts training with Han how to drift, and they're practicing now down near the docks, and they're practicing in the mountain and whatnot. And they're doing all this.
It is worth noting that Sean made that a condition because originally Han was just like, no, we work in the delivery and pickup business now. You're going to help me pick up money because I kind of work with DK for the Yakuza. So we're going around getting money for that.
Yeah, but we do find out though as well that DK is not actually Yakuza. His uncle is an actual member of the Yakuza. DK is just like kind of trying to pretend that he is, and like probably wants to become part of it, but isn't yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Han makes him go in and try and get money from this big sumo wrestler looking dude in a hot tub, and doesn't go super well as you could imagine.
I mean, it's just a comedy beat scene. It doesn't really
it's not
influence
important.
anything.
Yeah. But so there's montages of him training, and this is where it gets me, is they're just kind of montages into him winning at the parking structure. And I'm like, oh, we've done that. And at this point, I'm like, okay, so what's the movie about? Like, what are we building to now? And then it just kind of it veers more into the romance angle. And Neela spending time with them, drifting with them, talking about drifting, and all the rest of it. And of course, this pisses off DK, who then comes down and punches the shit out of Sean about halfway, 2/3 out of the movie, wherever it is.
I mean, about the halfway point, roundabout.
Yeah, something like that. Because
this series of events here, like specifically from the moment where he goes on the date with Neela to pretty much his uncle showing up, was the most whiplash I've experienced in one of these films, because it's so fast paced with so many things happening after so long of, as you called it, meandering. Because he goes on a date, she's good at drifting, so she elaborates on that. DK shows up, punches out Sean. She immediately goes to DK and breaks up with him. And then we just get into what I can only call the third act, with the actual uncle showing up from the Yakuza.
I would also say the actual plot starts, which is the uncle shows up to, and obviously he's like the higher up of whatever DK does, because all the money is going to him, and he's like, hey, your partner, meaning Han, is stealing, like he's doing other things, and you need to put a stop to that. So DK goes to Han and pulls out a gun, and it's a big tense moment, and it results in the big race that has the big moment, because they're all racing in the streets, and they're driving towards the crowd in the busy street, and the crowd just parts like the Red Sea as they drift to angelic music through the crowd. So
so dumb.
Yeah.
There's one other moment in that race where DK drifts to the point where he's able to drive backwards for a while, and he's able to fire off shots at Han. And that just felt a bit too much to me. I can appreciate they're good at drifting, but like driving backwards is a different skill set entirely.
Well, I remember Brian doing that in the last movie.
Yeah, and I didn't like it there either.
That's true. Honestly, the fact that he was firing a gun just made me think of John Wick. And that's not a good comparison to think of in your action scene, because the action in this is nothing compared to John Wick, obviously. And we say this because we did John Wick 4 between Fast and the Furious 2 and 3. That's where things lined up for us.
That's our recordings. Keep an eye on the timeline. It's very confusing.
Yes. So Han, like another car crashes into Han, because they're driving through the streets with all the public traffic, and a car crashes in. Remember this for a future movie.
Yeah.
All I'm going to say is that they retcon who was behind the wheel of this other random car later on.
I mean, I have a grasp for the timeline without having seen the stuff. I get a gist of, like, this movie, without spoiling too much, this movie was filmed in 2006. It was released in 2006. In terms of the Fast and Furious universe, this movie does not take place in 2006.
It takes place in like 2013 or something.
And that blows my mind.
Which is actually ridiculous, because there's a lot of people, they're showing off people with flip phones recording things with their flip phones, and I'm like, this is supposed to be set later than this.
Yep.
There's no, this does not make sense.
It's solely because all of their money goes into cars. They can't afford better phones.
And you could tell this was a new thing at the time, as people could record videos on their phones, so they're showing it off.
Well, it wasn't even the recording. I mean, if we're jumping ahead slightly, they're on the mountain race. Everyone's watching it on their phones, and you have to assume that these people that are stationed around each like turn, and they're probably live streaming it themselves.
Yeah.
I assume that's what's happening. But then there's one point in this movie where they specifically show it's just straightaway. There's on the edge of a cliff. There's nobody around, and DK rams Sean, and everyone's like, "Oh no, that ain't right."
I wasn't even specifically.
There's no one here. No one's recording you.
I wasn't even specifically talking about the ending. Like, you see them all with flip phones during the parking stuff. The first race.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. I mean,
I was more focused on the property damage.
They're not watching the race through them, but they're all, you see them all taking photos and recording stuff on their phones.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So you've got the romance thing playing out, and you've got like this stuff of them getting after Han. So Han actually car gets crashed into. He flips, and there's an attempt to go and get him from the car, but then it blows up. So Han is seemingly deceased.
And, like, as far as this movie goes,
he's dead.
He is deceased. Like, it's not a thing where... Because I kept on waiting for it, because I know just based off cast lists for future movies. I know he shows up, so I kept waiting for that thing where he's like, no. Even if it's a post-credit scene, I was waiting for it, and it never came.
A bunch of the sequels after this are set before this, just so they could have Han.
Yeah.
That's just is straight up what it is.
That's insane to me.
Right? And then everything sort of like breaks apart, and Sean goes to his dad's with Neela, because Neela was in the passenger seat with him, right, the whole time, and they go to his dad's, and then they've been followed here by DK. DK pulls out his gun, and that's when his dad shows up. He's like, "I wouldn't do that, buddy." You know, his dad's waiting there with a handgun, and this is where he's like, "You know, Sean, I have to get you out of here. You have to get in a plane tonight." And he's like, "No, I need to clean up my mess. You have to understand that, right?" He's like, "Yeah, take this car I've been working on and go put a fancy engine in it so you can do your race." But Sean's big plan is that he takes money that he knew that Han had to the Yakuza uncle, and he's like, "Hey sir, this is money that belonged to you. I know this is what you wanted. I'd like to propose a peaceful solution to everything that's been going on." And what's so weird about this is that, as far as the uncle's concerned, I'm not sure why he would care about this weird rivalry between DK and Sean. It seems tangential to anything going on with Han.
The only thing that I was able to parse is that Neela specifically said that her backstory was that her parents died or whatever, or her mom was like a prostitute or something, and she was raised by DK's grandmother. So she's been in the family for a while. Okay. And the fact that Sean came in and disrupted that family unit, where the uncle would probably be around as well, I have to assume that he had some stake in that. But the movie does not explicitly say that.
Okay.
I'm just putting that on there.
There's a big extended montage of them fixing up his car, because the police took all the cars at Han's place, because Hans was fairly wealthy. He had a lot of cars. He had a big place.
He was wealthy because he was stealing from Yakuza. Yes. But, yeah.
The police have taken all the cars, except the one that he wrecked at the start, with the parking place. And they take the engine from that, they put it in the dad's like old relic that he found that was destroyed. And
I'm sure it's probably not a Buick, but I just call that style of car a Buick.
Sure. And they get that all cleaned up and get it ready for a race. But he says to the uncle, he's like, "Look, I propose a race between me and your son, or between me and your nephew, and the loser has to leave town." And DK's like, "I already beat this loser." And the uncle's like, "Well, it should be easy to do again then, shouldn't it?" And he's like, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's have a race." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." Which, honestly, I appreciated this just because at the very least it set up a goal, it set up a stake, and it set up like something simple that we could like have a resolution to. Because so much of this movie did not have that. So much of this movie just felt like it didn't know where it was going.
Yeah, as soon as they announced there was going to be the race, I was like, okay, this seems, based off runtime left and how much the movie there was, this seems like this is it. There's not going to be a little extra like twist on it where it's, oh, this race, but actually this other thing comes in. It's like, no, we're just going to do the race, and whoever wins will end the movie. And that is what it ended up being. I do want to point out real quick, I really enjoyed the performance of the uncle, the one in the Yakuza.
He's alright, yeah. I don't have a problem with him.
I looked him up, and his biggest thing, of course, was Hattori Hanzo from Kill Bill 1 and 2.
Ah, okay.
Because I knew I recognized him. And I don't know, I just really liked it. He had this air of menace around him, even more so than the actual villain, DK, where I was like, nah, DK, because he immediately, as soon as the uncle walks in, he just crumbles. He just immediately bows down. It's like, "Oh, uncle, I'm so happy you're here. Here, please take my chair." Whereas this guy, he walks in and I'm like, nah, he's killed someone. Like, I can feel it. He just walks in, he's killed someone.
Oh, yeah. But he feels like he'll honor the race. He doesn't feel like someone who like is going to be a villain. He's a Yakuza, and he's all these things, but he's someone who has like honor and respect, and like will be adhere to anything he said he's going to do. At least that's the vibe you get. And he does, when Sean wins the race, he's like, "Okay, you've won. You're free to go." And that's basically it. I have nothing to say about the race itself, other than what you already mentioned, where the people at the top of the mountain are all watching it on their flip phones, which is weird. But other than that, I don't really have much to say, because it's just a kind of a quick cut mess of like dark images of cars overtaking each other.
The only thing I had is they keep on trading back and forth for first place, but the end of the race, the reason that it ends is that DK keeps on trying to ram Sean off the cliffside. Sean ends up, throwing on the brakes or whatever. DK just flies off the cliffside himself and tumbles down and crashes below. And there's this last minute little action bit where Sean, I guess, has taken the next turn or whatever. He's driving down the road and DK's car is about to land on top of him. And Sean, in a slow motion scene, just drives around it. And I felt like that would have been the moment in any other script where he has to, the force using by Luke at the Death Star or something, like, we're going to use your drifting abilities to dodge this last little bit. But he doesn't even drift around it. He just swerves. And it just felt really out of place as that last little bit of action.
Yeah. It does kind of feel like they struggle to like make that final race feel more special, really.
Yeah.
Especially since like it felt like the same mountain that Sean was practicing to learn how to drift on in the first place.
I'm positive it was.
So it's like what you should have done with this is like not have that mountain before this scene. Have this be like, maybe introduce it with the with Neela talking about drifting and say we used to come up to this mountain, right? Still introduce it in that scene, but have that and then have it be a big deal. It's like you're going to race because they say right before the race starts where Bow Wow's like, DK is the only one who's ever made it to the bottom, and I'm like, but he's been practicing on this mountain the whole movie, so it doesn't feel like that big a deal. It's like he's been learning on this.
What I think there needed to be, and it sounds a little bit, I don't want to say cliched, but it is. What there needed to be is there's like the last turn around the mountain is some like specially named turn that is responsible for so many crashes, and he's constantly been trying to land it and he never quite gets it, and it's only in this last final race that he lands it perfectly.
Yeah, it felt like it should have been like, no, we have to race on that mountain. That should have felt like a big deal, but it's just kind of, it's like, but that didn't feel like a big deal, but now you're telling me that DK is the only one who can do it.
I mean, if they wanted to do stuff we've already set up, it feels like more so they should have said, we're going to race in that parking garage.
Yeah.
Because that's all we've done up to this point.
Yeah, just weird build-up of the action itself, but the ending of the movie is we're back at that parking structure.
Oh my god.
Right? We're back at the parking structure. Sean is just hanging around with Neela, and Bow Wow says, hey, there's this guy who wants to race you today. He's like, not tonight. He's like, no, he said Han is family. And I think what's so weird about this is that is this kind of the first time that this franchise has actually used the word family in that way, you know? Like, it's not the first time they've said the word family, but this is the first time it's been said like that.
But this one is technically in 2013.
Yeah, but that's what blows my mind about it, though, is they didn't know whether they were going to make it that big a thing. Yeah. And that's actually the other thing that really blew my mind here is that, so this obviously builds up to like the cameo from Dom, right? Vin Diesel's there in the car, and he exchanges a few words with Sean. He's like, hey kid, this race, and I was, me and Han go way back, blah blah blah. Is that, I know, weird, I was not expecting this part of it where I knew Vin Diesel was going to have a cameo, and I knew that Han died in this movie, right? And then we were going to set other movies set before it. That's all fine. I did not expect this movie to seemingly set up that Vin or the Dom and Han worked together before. That actually kind of surprised me because I'm like, wait, you actually can't. It's almost like you knew you were going to set movies after this before.
That's what I'm saying. It's so strange the way it was structured. The way before they made the decision, I imagine them saying it, is that, Han has this mysterious past. He explicitly says at one point he's out running and he's like making a run for the border. He left for something. So they're going to put forward this idea that Han worked with Vin Diesel's character in some time before Fast and Furious 1. That's the idea I think they were running with. But obviously, Han is the best character in this movie, and everyone loves Han. So the marketing department says, okay, let's see if we can make this work.
Yeah, Han's in the next one, so the next one's set before this.
Yeah, which I really want to see. Did you say you watched 4 already?
No, I've not seen 4.
I really want to see how they're going to explain it in the movie, because they don't do any hints that he survived it in this movie. So either they're going to have to say I survived the crash thing, which then messes with later timeline stuff, or they're going to have to just ignore it.
No. He's not survived the crash. The next movie's set before this one.
No, I understand, but I don't think they do the reveal that this movie was set before this one at this point.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I don't know how they make that clear, or if they do make it clear. Maybe it was just something they talked about around the movie.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, isn't Juan, when he... Because I think Juan is the one who's directing when they do end up making it kind of at the same time. Didn't he do the Saw movie? Which is infamous for all those movies overlapping each other in time and taking place at different points.
Kinda, yeah. So I suppose there's some truth to that. Yeah, it's just such a weird thing that it actually felt like they kind of had some stuff planned with this ending, even though I find it hard to believe they actually did. It's very wild. So yeah, you have your Vin Diesel little cameo where it's like, yeah, that's race. And I was sort of thinking to myself, like, but Dom, I should say, you like to race in a straight line that's a quarter of a mile. You can't handle all this drifting.
And Sean literally says that. He says, this isn't a 10-second race, right? And Dom replies, oh, I got all the time in the world.
Yeah, so weird.
Can I give you a little behind the scenes on this?
Go on.
So this scene didn't exist. They sent the movie to test audiences, and this scene did not exist. And test audiences were like, we kind of wanted to connect a little bit to the movies before. So they talked to Vin Diesel. They also were considering talking to Paul Walker, but apparently he was too old at this point, which that didn't work out. But regardless.
And that is so... Given the fact that they've brought everybody... Given the fact that we're still doing Fast and the Furious movies and Vin Diesel's like 60 and we're still doing it, it's insane that they had that problem here. That Paul Walker, who was maybe hitting 30 at the time, was too old for their target audience. That is so stupid. Especially since the main guy feels like he's far too old anyway.
Oh, absolutely. But anyway, they talked to Vin, and Vin was like, I'll do it, but only if you relinquish the rights to the Riddick franchise to me, so I can make it on my own.
This part I knew. I knew that he only agreed to do this scene because he wanted to do another Riddick movie, and that was the way it was. They give him the rights. Yeah. So that was the franchise that Vin cared about. He wanted to do more Riddick.
Absolutely. But then he made Riddick 2013. It didn't do as hot as Fast 4 or 5. And he was like, well, I guess I'll stick around.
Yeah, they started offering him buckets of money, and he was like, yep, you know what? I'll keep doing it. Yeah. And Riddick 2013 is fine. It's like, honestly, it's better than Chronicles of Riddick. It's a decent enough little movie. It's not as good as Pitch Black by any means, but it's there. Which has a connection to this franchise because, other than Vin Diesel, because the villain from Fast 2 is in that movie too.
Oh, all right. I thought you meant like connection, like it's set 400 years after Fast. No. The skull of Dominic Turturro is hanging on a shelf somewhere in the background.
Yeah, Riddick's the descendant of Dom somehow.
Perfect. Yep.
I don't know. Wild. Yeah, honestly, like this movie is such a offshoot. It doesn't feel that important to anything, of course. Not that it had to be entertaining. But it feels like smaller than the last one. And,
way smaller.
And I'm not so sure that is to its benefit. Like, obviously, sometimes there's certain franchises that are better for going smaller because they should be more intimate or whatever. But I think the thing that I did at least kind of got some fun out of the last one was that it was bigger, it was bombastic. Even if it was cartoony in places, I did at least get some entertainment out of that. Here, like, I don't care about the aura of the drift or the street racing scene, so sort of going back in that direction was I like the idea of like the Yakuza uncle like being okay and accepting the outcome of the race and seeing that as an honorable way. Like, no, you have to accept this, DK, you little shit, you have to go now.
I also do wonder whether or not DK just straight up died, because we don't see what happened to him after his car fell off a cliff.
No, I think you get one shot of him, do you not? Like, sort of looking upset that he's lost?
I didn't see it. If so, I might have looked away because I was like, okay, is the movie done yet?
Maybe I imagined that. I thought you got a shot of him looking upset. But, and also at the end, when he's doing this race with Dom, it's Neela who walks out and does the goal. She's the starting line girl. I don't know what the correct term is.
Yeah. Which I do appreciate that ending a little bit, because they do... It's subtle. It's very subtle, but, it's still like the car meetup. It's all these muscle cars and whatnot hanging out there. And they kind of give this vibe that it's different now that Sean is DK. instead of Takashi, because before it had a lot of like, you know, spiky haired Yakuza looking guys, whereas this time it's, I don't know, it just feels a bit more open, I guess. It's very subtle vibe, and I don't know what it is specifically, but it feels like there's been a change in the racing culture because a white guy is currently their top racer.
But white savior, I suppose. I don't know if that's
why not.
That's the way to go with it, but sure. It baffles me that this franchise up until now is so determined to have the blandest white guy in the lead role. Yeah, and you know, I don't want to harp on an accent too much because, you know, an accent's an accent. But there's definitely some accents that I find it harder to take seriously. There's ones in the UK that I can't take seriously. A Newcastle accent, it is impossible for me not to think you sound a bit silly. An Alabama accent, I kind of feel the same way.
I mean, I agree. Even being in America, I 100% agree. I think wasn't that a story with Schwarzenegger where he wasn't able to dub himself in the German Terminator because his accent in German is like hokey?
Oh, I didn't know that.
I heard something about that. He's like more from the rural parts of Austria, Germany area, and so when it came time to dubbing the German version, it's like, no, you sound like a hick. Get out of here.
Whereas he sounds all exotic to us. We were
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Well,
which I'm sure over in Japan that's how that would be. A southern accent, they'd be like, "Oh my god, who are you?"
Or to an Australian.
Yeah, that's it.
In this case, who's like, "Oh, I'm in awe. I'm in awe of your thing."
I love this one line that Han had halfway through the movie when he sees Sean flirting with Neela. He says, "Why couldn't you just get a Japanese girl like every other white guy in this country?" It felt almost improv, but I loved it.
Yeah. But needless to say, this movie doesn't really offer much. I don't think the action scenes or the racing scenes are particularly good. I don't think the characters outside of Han being kind of cool and charismatic are particularly good. Like, the main guy is like just a wet fart of a main character.
I hope we never run into him again.
If we do see him again in some small capacity, like, I don't know if the world can handle him and Paul Walker being in the scene at the same time.
It's going to be the first instance of a white hole. It's like a black hole, but it just sucks in charisma instead.
Yeah, so, you know, I think the next one, I assume, is when it shifts to, like, Vin Diesel's more the lead and Paul Walker's more, you know, part of the ensemble rather than the main guy. So that's a welcome change when it comes, if it is the next one.
I mean, we're dropping thes with the next movie, so
we are, aren't we? Yeah.
See how that goes.
The next one, we have Han back. We're bringing Gal Gadot.
Oh boy.
We're bringing back everyone else from the first movie. Shea Wiggum's in the next one. I like him, actually. I like Shea Wiggum. Okay. So, yeah, yeah, let's do it. Let's hopefully not suck.
The real question is this movie going to focus more on cars or crime? Because it seems to be that's where the transition is.
Well, I actually did read the IMDb description for the next one.
Okay.
And you know what's so funny about it? You know how... when we were talking about the second one, we said this was clearly supposed to be Dom. You know, like he's like Brian. Like, oh, you need to go undercover to take down some bad guy, and you want your buddy to come and be your partner. And you instead of picking Dom because we didn't have Vin Diesel, you picked this other guy. Here's a description for the fourth one on IMDb.
Okay.
Brian O'Connor, back working for the FBI in Los Angeles, teams up with Dominic Toretto to bring down a heroin importer by infiltrating his operation. It's the plot of the second movie, but with Dom as the second guy instead.
So in reality, they're not dropping the thes from the title. They're dropping the twos from the title.
And the plot.
The exact same carryover. I'm interested to see how Han's going to filter into that. It'll be cool to see, but yeah. I mean... I'm learning not to get my hopes up that much with this franchise yet. We'll see what happens later on, but
I don't know. I hope it's more entertaining again. Maybe veering more, if not better than 2, just because, you know, I didn't love 2. It was just more entertaining than the first one and this one. Yeah. So I guess we have to rate this movie. I have less to say, I think, of this one overall. So
yeah, same.
All right.
It's for me personally, I think that I think it's more entertaining than you give it credit for. I think that, yes, it's just this completely different offshoot. It doesn't feel like it's connected to the core franchise as we've established, but I'm okay with that. I'm all right with it being this totally separate thing. That being said, character-wise, yeah, not everyone's a failure except for Han. That's not even a controversial statement. I think that's pretty obvious just by watching it. I just enjoy the fact that this is the first movie where I felt like I didn't have to be a car nut to really enjoy it. I didn't have to be a car nut to understand what they're getting out of this. Like all the previous movies, they're like, oh, I got my Nissan Skyline and it does 400 torques per minute or whatever. I'm like, I don't care.
Much like you were asking earlier about crime versus like the heist sort of superhero movie that it's going to become for the next one. I do also wonder about that part of it. Like, are we, because it's Dom and the crew back, are we back to like obsessing over the details of the car still? Yeah, or is that already gone by 4?
But that'll be the part that I'm not interested in. Like, if they want to try to pitch it to me being not a car nut, they're more than welcome to. But I think that's the strength of this movie, is that it's the style of driving. It is the way that you steer. And I can understand that. I can easily get into that. I think they're a bit crazy with it, but I can at least get into what it is they're talking about.
Yeah, I think for me it's just the characters just are so shit, and the script is not, you know, like I say, there's not this sort of like momentum for a long time in the movie where you're just kind of waiting for it to kick into high gear. I can keep going all day.
I was gonna say, I think that's like the 5th pun you've made without even meaning to.
Yeah, I didn't mean that one. I wasn't thinking that one in advance. It just came out, and I was like, "Oh, that's good. That's damn good."
But yeah, for me, I gotta say, I don't think it is better than the second movie, but I also don't think it's really worse. It's different in a lot of ways, but I'm gonna have to give it the same score I did the last one, which is a flat 6.
Yeah, I can't agree with that. I think
that's fine.
I think this is kind of similar in level to the first movie for me, in that I just couldn't give a shit about the plot or the romance, and I didn't like the main character one bit. If anything, the first one might be slightly better just because it has other actors in it that are
okay. Yeah,
you know, not even better, because again, Vin Diesel's not a great actor, but at least there's a bit more star power kind of there.
I know it's just this guy, our main character, his biggest thing is he went for pretty much the entire series run of NCIS New Orleans, which
yeah, so I think I'm going to go with a similar score to the first one, and I'm going to give this a 4.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not in the positive end of this one at all. I did not enjoy it. 2, at least I had at least a bit of entertainment out of it at times. So we'll see what they do with the 4th one. We'll see.
Based off what we're saying here, I think the biggest thing is you're looking for stronger characters, and I'm just looking for dumb, stupid fun. So by the time we hit the tail end of this franchise, I think we'll both be getting what we want.
I mean, yeah, you know, dumb, stupid fun is something that I can at least get on board with as well. Yeah, so hopefully it can veer more into that next time. So yeah, we'll see. But that is our thoughts on Tokyo Drift. I guess we have to say if it's making the cut. Obviously, I'm saying no, it does not make the cut.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'm not willing to give it the worst level, but I'll say it doesn't make the cut.
Yeah. So, all right. Obviously, next time we'll be back with Fast and Furious, or I'm just going to call it Fast and Furious 4. And this was Fast and Furious 3. You get a problem with that? Then tough. I don't care.
Hey, by the time we hit the 5th one, they kind of agree with you.
So, yeah, well, we'll come back for that next time. Like I say, we're already up to number 5 with this block. We'll be back sometime next year for when... Or assuming the 11th one's coming out next year. If it ends up getting pushed to the year after, it may be 2 years from now. But we'll come back and do the rest on the run-up to the 11th one.
We got all the time in the world.
Yes. I'm in no rush to get through it. Because we have to stop, because we have to go into the Indiana Jones movies so that we're ready for a new one of that coming out. So, yeah.
Speaking of things we recently discovered we're doing, tell them about the bonus for this month, Pete.
Oh yeah, if you like bonus content, you want to support all the shows we do, specifically Collector's Cut, you can get bonus episodes every month on Patreon for this month, we did Biker Boys, which
boy.
will already be up if you go and check out Patreon. In fact, Extra Reels, which is our second bonus show at the $5 tier, will already be up probably, or will be up soon as this episode goes out. So go check out that out. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or you can do it on YouTube with a one-time super thanks, or becoming a YouTube member, or if you want to do it for free, which of course is appreciated as well, you can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. You can rate the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. Give us 5 stars. All these things do help. Thank you, and just watch the show, listen to the show, enjoy the show. All these things help, and we do appreciate your time and hopefully enjoying our rambles and dissections of movies. Hopefully these Fast and Furious movies are at least entertaining to listen to, because I can't imagine the analysis is as good as some of the other things we've done.
What are you talking about? We know exactly what we're talking about here.
But that is the show. That is the Collector's Cut. So we'll see you next week for the next entry in the Fast and the Furious franchise. But for now, that is us. Thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies and live your life a quarter podcast at a time.